Oh, cool.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
I
am
see now it's
recording now.
recording. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
So continuing where we left off. So this is the method where we're going to create a new data source to get this configuration constant. So I'll just sign in there. Yeah, something that also happens quite frequently working with Tableau, things will trigger an extract refresh. So what it's doing right now is it's saying, hey, we're creating a new data source. I'd better create an extract refresh for the other data source. I wonder if I can cancel this because this is going to try to pull in a million rows here. Okay, great. To create a new custom data source with a custom SQL query, we drag this over into the data source pane and we'll create a single row data source. So let's see if I can do this from memory.
How usually do you do it? Do you do it in Enterprise Manager and then copy the query here, or there are some tools here that you can just directly test it?
I usually do it within SQL Server Management Studio, then I copy and paste it over here.
Okay.
This one is simple enough that it's...
You can use joins, all normal SQL syntaxes, right?
You can do any SQL syntax that's understood by the underlying database. Since we created a connection to MS SQL Server, anything that is valid TSQL is permissible here.
Okay.
We can preview the results here, and then there's our docs URL. Okay. I actually don't want to do this, so I wanted to just show how you would do that. We already have the docs URL in the, oh boy. I hosed myself somehow. All right, so we'll just go ahead and we'll just go ahead and restart that. So the next step is to create a worksheet. We'll call it info. And then we'll go over here into the side panel. Under dimensions, you should see the docs URL. So this is the docs URL that was coming from the cross join in exam room utilization. What we'll also want to do is go ahead and create a calculated field that contains the specific URL that we're interested in. So the docs URL is just the base URL where all of the documents are stored, and then we'll want to create a calculated field, and here I've already done that for this case. And it's just the base docs URL plus the path that goes to the help guide. Once we've done that, then what we'll want to do is pull that over to the detail shelf. So pulling it over to any shelf really, but specifically the detail shelf makes that value available within the worksheet. If you didn't at least do this, you could create an info button, but it wouldn't be able to access the actual URL until you put it onto the detail shelf. Then we'll go here and we'll hide the title. And then we'll change the mark type here to shape. And then we'll click on the shape card, which just appeared. So get more shapes. And then we'll find our custom shape that we had deposited in that My Tableau repository folder. Assign the palette and click OK. Now you see the info button up here, but it's really, really small. So we'll click on the size card and bring that size up. So that will make it a little bigger. It's still pretty small, but another thing we can do is this info button graphic is displayed in a bounding box, and we can find the edges of that box and click and move stuff around. Let's see, we can make that a little bit smaller within the bounding
What's the
box.
difference between sizing with a size marker or just dragging the dimension of the object?
You know, I don't quite know. I like to play with the size first, because when it's really small, it's also really hard to find the sides of that bounding box. So I like to get it big enough so that I can easily click and drag on the sides of the bounding box, and then I can make it bigger. The other thing is that they you can still get into some trouble with the bounding box. So they seem to grow in size at different rates. So for example, if I made this bounding box a little bit bigger, well, I guess in that case it worked, but in some cases you lose the edges of the graphic. You'll see what I mean when you get in there and you play around with it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to undo that.
The image has to be PNG file only?
That's a good question. I believe
that
vector
graphic.
Yeah, I don't know if it will do an SVG. It will definitely do portable network graphic. It will probably do a JPEG. You know, this is, you know, probably any common file format will get rendered. I'm not sure it will do SVG, however, because I don't know if desktop can render that. It would probably work on the server if you uploaded this to the server, but I don't know if it would render in desktop.
Do you store this graphic in TFS, or this is only your local machine only?
Right now, it's only on my local machine. We should probably store it somewhere in TFS.
Yeah.
Along with other graphics. I was thinking about that. I got it from Kevin, who copied it from someone else. I did include that in the documentation, thinking, you know, if all else fails, you can grab it out of the how-to document.
Yeah, and when you deploy to server, it goes to same folder structure on the server, like my repository, or somewhere else?
I don't know where it goes on the server.
It's probably embedded, right? It's embedded.
I would think so. Yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
All right. I guess if you could just upload it somewhere, the graphic itself, this way we don't have to recreate it, and because I'm afraid it might be different in size if we recreate it a different way. So
right.
Just a side note, just maybe upload it somewhere.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So the next step is to create what's called an action, more specifically a URL action that will respond to clicks on the info button. I did have this later in the procedure, but let's go ahead and do it now. Let's turn off the tooltip. So to do that, you click on the tooltips card and you unclick show tooltips. And then you won't get that annoying tooltip on the info button anymore. So let's go to worksheet and actions. And you'll see all of these actions in here. And what we want to do is we want to add an action and select URL. And then and let's take a moment to explore this particular screen. So there's a section here called source sheets. So those of you familiar with C# programming, for example, in action is really just an event handler, and we're basically with the source sheets and this run action on, we're choosing like what event to handle. So we want to restrict ourselves to handling events that are coming from the newly created info sheet, and we want to run the action when the info sheet, when a mark on the info sheet is selected. There's actually, and we talked about this in stand-up maybe a month or two ago, with the info button, you can only run the action on the select. You can't, it won't run on deselect. So there is this sort of two-cycle problem that happens. You push the info button, you're really selecting it, and then you push it again, you're deselecting it, and it won't run on the second button push, but then it will run on the third. That's just a consequence of we only have these actions to choose from. So, and then what URL do we want this delegate to open? So we will put in here docs URL full, and we can go ahead and test the link. So you didn't see it, so it popped up in my browser on the other screen. I'll just pull that over here. For some reason, I don't have access to this, from where I'm sitting to this to documents on the server, but you can see this is the URL that it generated. So if that's the correct URL, great. But that is something that you can test from here as well.
Mm-hmm.
So let's click on OK. And then that, I think, I forgot to name it. So we can go ahead and edit it here, and we can name this info so that we can tell it apart from all of the other events. And now when I click on this, I'll bring this over again. So if I click on this, it will open up the, I accidentally clicked it twice. It will open up the URL. Lastly, we want to put that onto the dashboard. So in order to get that, so open up a dashboard where this is going to live. And we will see in the column at the left, the info sheet showing up in this list. To add it to the dashboard, bring it over. Now things will go in as tiled by default. What that means is that it will try to pick a square space to deposit this into. So pick one that's unobtrusive. Eventually this is going to float, so we can move it anywhere we want. So drop it in here, and then go to this triangle on the left side, the gray one, and deselect title, and go in here again and select floating. Now this is no longer a tiled layout, and we can resize it as desired and move it around. So we'll just move this next to the existing info button for now. You may have to play with the sizes to get things to be consistent. Another thing that may happen is when you deposit a worksheet onto a dashboard, it often puts things into the filters column, so beware of that. I don't always notice that, and I end up publishing a workbook that has some extraneous information in here. You can just remove that from the dashboard, and then we're all done. Any questions about info buttons?
Yeah, Greg, I saw that actual link has like encoded URL with percent sign. This is because it actual URL has spaces, or do we have to encode it, or it's automatically would
I
do
think
with
it's
HTML
automatically,
code?
yeah, it's automatically encoded. So yeah, if we go to the info worksheet, you have to be in a worksheet, by the way, to see all the dimensions and everything, but we can look at the docs URL full. Oh, we did have this. Actually, I think we did have the encoding in there.
Yeah, the document name has spaces.
Yeah.
So I
So
think
the %20, that's a space encoding here.
Yeah.
I've been actually putting this into the description, right? I don't know, Greg, you put it or I know
can't
I've been putting
remember.
this in the beginning.
Yeah, I can't remember if that was like that in the TFS task, or if that or if I put those in.
Yeah, some of them I put like that, and then I stopped doing that. But maybe you just
Yeah, I
continued with
don't
that.
think that's. I'm guessing that's not necessary. I think you could just put spaces in there.
Okay, so you don't have to encode it.
That's something I would have to play with. I mean, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so it went ahead and it added the spaces in there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So that's it. Any more?
So when you check in this code into the TFS, it doesn't take that GIF PNG file into the TFS. You did in the local, but still, when you check in the code, it doesn't get that how the TFS works in this case in the Tableau.
So once the info button's been added, we'll have to save the workbook and empty the extract, and then yeah, we save the whole workbook into TFS. I think that actually answers the question that came up earlier in the session. The info button itself is encoded in the workbook. We didn't have to save that graphic separately anywhere in TFS. Does that answer your question, Sunil?
Yeah, but okay.
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 Yeah, oh. Yeah, let's go ahead and move along to emptying a workbook. So the use case for this is actually a well-known one, and I think Tableau engineered this solution specifically for people who didn't want to deal with uploading a massive packaged workbook to the server. Why not let the server do the extract? So what Tableau has provided for us is a method to basically put a filter specifically on the creation of a local extract. So let me back up a moment. You can put data filters in at multiple levels within Tableau. So if we go to a data source, you can see there's a place to add filters up here. So if I added a filter at the data source level, it would actually work just as data was coming in off the wire and before it created any extracts or visualizations. Another place to put a filter is in the worksheet itself. So if I were to, oh boy. This is one of those things that you just have to learn to live with Tableau, is it will try to create a extract seemingly every 5 minutes. All right, so let me go ahead. If we go to the worksheet here, actually, let's not go to that worksheet. It's going to make me click this for everything. for every mark on the page. Okay, so let's go to the line graph, I guess. So there's a lesson in here too. You should let Tableau finish what it's trying to do. This is the one I actually wanted to go to. Okay, so the way to empty and extract is to create a constant parameter and then filter against that parameter so that the filter will always evaluate the false, and then it will exclude any rows from going into the extract. I showed you earlier where we could add filters directly to the data source. You can also add filters directly to a worksheet. These filters up here will get evaluated just before the visualization is evaluated on the worksheet. And then there's a third place to put in a filter, and that is on the data source extract itself. So if I right-click on the data source, which you see up here in the left-hand pane, make sure that Use Extract is clicked. I don't know how that became unclicked. There we go. And then go to Extract Data, and there is an option to add a filter. So this filter is different from the other two, the data source filter and the worksheet filter, in that this filter is only evaluated when you're creating an extract. And this is what Tableau added so that people could create an empty extract. Okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. We do have this, I'll go ahead and just create this parameter from scratch again. So I'll call this one emptiness. Make sure it is a Boolean parameter and make sure it has a constant value of true. Okay, so a parameter is like a variable that we can set within Tableau. Next, I will create a calculated field, and we'll call this one empty. And we'll set the calculated field equal to the parameter that we just created called emptiness. And the reason we do this is that we can create a filter based on a calculated field. You can't create a filter directly off of a parameter, but we can sort of bring it forward by using a calculated field. Then when I open up this extract data menu, I can add in as a filter this empty parameter, not parameter, but this empty calculated field, which I just created. Click on true and exclude. So this will basically exclude every row in the extract. And then click on extract. Yeah, this is because I'm running this in Chicago, but the server is in the East Coast. And once you do that, voila, all of the marks should disappear because we have no rows. And what we can do is we can export a packaged workbook. So I'm just going to call this one empty. And I actually want to put it somewhere else. See, I was doing this in here. Okay, and if we go back to that folder, we can see that the empty version of this packaged workbook is only 108 kilobytes, whereas the actual version that contained all the data was almost 42 megabytes. And then this is what we want to put into TFS. So and if it, oh, I forgot one very important thing. Let's do this again really quickly. And this actually happens to us in production, and we get called out on it sometimes. Before we actually export that package workbook, here's the hocus pocus. We can remove this calculated field. So we will remove the calculated field. That will cascade delete the filter on that we have on the extract, but it will not trigger a refresh of that extract. So once we've done that, now we can export the packaged workbook. And we'll just write over that one. Okay, and then the effect will be that now we have a much smaller workbook, and we'll be able to load it, we'll be able to publish it to a server and refresh it there. Because that filter is gone, it will refresh at the server to its full size.
Mm-hmm. So do you always put into TFS TWBX files, or sometimes it's TWB just without X?
We always put in, if the workbook has been packaged, it will be a TWBX file. The unpackaged workbooks are TWB. The difference is in the server, if you look at a workbook that's been uploaded as a TWBX file, it will say extract in the data source type when you look at that workbook in the server. And this one will be a live connection because it's a TWB file.
But do you have to empty only, you empty either kind, right? Or do you empty only the packaged ones?
You only have to empty the packaged ones. The TWB files, the ones that are live connections, do not actually contain any data in them.
Okay.
There's actually kind of a cool thing you can look at. If you know, I didn't put this in the document, but a TWBX file, a packaged workbook, or actually a TDSX file, the packaged data source, is actually an archive, and you can open it with 7-zip. So if I extract all the files, and we look inside of the extract, you'll see that the TWBX file actually contains the TWB file and a folder that has the data in it. So that's kind of the mechanism there. So you know, it makes it a little bit clearer what's going on with the TWBX and the TWB. It really is just every packaged workbook file really is an unpackaged workbook with the data in a specific format.
Okay.
Now, some of our data sources are also packaged, and we also like to save those in TFS in empty format so that they don't. So we're not saving many megabytes of data. Unfortunately, unlike with the packaged workbook, there's no easy way to save a data source that doesn't also trigger a refresh. So, for example, you might think that you could go to right-click on the data source and add to save to data sources, and save this as a TDSX. You could do that when you go into the TDSX. When you go into the folder and you look for this, you see that, oh boy, it didn't actually filter anything out. So I think that has to do with the fact that that filter we put in there is only working on packaged workbooks. It doesn't actually work on data sources. So how do we do that? So that's a little bit more involved. What we need to do is publish the data source to a server. And here I've got it pointed at the internal site on the dev server. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll publish the data source there. And yeah, we'll overwrite it. It's there simply because I tested all of this last night. So now if we go to Analytics Dev, go to the internal site. That went to the default project, I believe. Click on data sources. We'll see this exam room utilization data source here, and it's an extract. And what we'll do is we'll download it. Okay, and now when we go to the downloads section, to the downloads folder, sorry, you'll see it's only 37 kilobytes here. And then this is the one that we want to include in TFS. So it's basically the same idea, but the process is just a little bit more involved. It has this extra step of publishing an empty data source to the server and then downloading it again from the server. Any questions on the empty workbook?
Was there something with the database connection? I don't remember. I think in the very beginning, Ben was talking about something like database connection gets stored with the workbook. So if you don't want to store it, you also have to empty something there.
The database connection information will be stored with the packaged workbook or with the packaged data source.
Okay, but do we need to remove it or it just stays there?
So the provisioning system will remove it at provisioning time. So for example, if it gets saved with Rothman Dev, if we're talking about the development provisioning system, when it gets provisioned, it will get checked out of TFS, and then the provisioning system will change the connection information to point at, say we're provisioning the CAO dev site, it will change the, it will use information in the provisioning database to overwrite the connection information with the CAO information.
Okay, so we don't actually need to worry about the connection.
Right.
But sometimes when, let's say when, I don't know, staff fixes the bugs and we ask her to publish right away without waiting for provisioning, she has to put the correct connection in, right?
That's right. In the case of manual publishing, you have to make sure that the connection info is right. Yeah, that's what I was talking about a little bit on Friday morning.
Right.
You know, I think it would be good practice to make sure that the at least the password is different. And it does, you know, I'm not saying this for security purposes. It's more, you know, like if we include this site name in the password, then in cases where, you know, someone is publishing a workbook manually, they'll always be prompted for a password from Tableau Desktop whenever they publish. And but the site name, but the database name will be in there. So if it's the CAO database, it will prompt you for a password. And if you think you're, you know, uploading to Rothman, you would type in the Rothman password, and then it would fail. So that would
I see where you're coming.
Yeah, so operationally, I think it's safer to do that. Now you could try to be extra careful, but I think that works when we have 2 clients, but when we have 4, it's going to be a little bit riskier. And when we certainly if CrossCurrent had 50 clients, I think you would need to have some other safeguards in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to be the case too. I mean, we could. I think that the provisioning system is fine from that point of view. It's always getting the password from a database. So that in that case, if the information is correct in the database, it won't get the wrong password ever. But I think we're always going to have a case where somebody is going to be uploading a data set or a workbook or a data source manually in response to some operational issue that comes up. So those are the things you can't predict.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very helpful. So it's probably going to prompt you for saving the recording. If you could set that along, that would be great.
It creates as a WAV file or MPEG file, probably.
Yeah.
As soon as we finish recording.
Yep.
Does it save only the voice or images too?
No, I think it's like video file, MPEG file.
Yeah, video. Right, it should be video. And if you could put that info button image somewhere in, I don't know where the most appropriate in TFS, that would be also helpful.
Okay, will do.
All right, thank you very much. And then don't do any of your info tasks. I'll assign it to Lev and Sunil, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay, yeah. Let me know if you run into any issues, and yeah, good luck.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.